Welcome to Discover the Truth. In Acts chapter 15, verse 29, the apostles render 4 commandments for the new Gentile believers in Antioch. Out of 4 commandments, 3 of them are dietary laws. From Genesis to Revelation, we find Yahweh has a lot to say about what we eat. Stay tuned now as we explore how those laws apply to us today.
From the time of the Messiah to our modern technological age, much Bible truth has been lost. With the melding of foreign philosophies and teachings unknown to the believers of the first century, the early church began a transformation away from its Hebrew origins. The question we need to ask ourselves is, just how far did it go? Join us for the next half hour as we take you on an incredible journey of biblical understanding as we uncover the foundation of the Christian faith. Are you ready to discover the truth?
Welcome back. I'm Michael Bannock, your host for this special question and answer edition of Discover the Truth. I'm very pleased once again to be joined by my friends, Elder Alan Mansager and Deacon Randy Folliard, both of Yahweh's Restoration Ministry. I'm very glad to be back, fellows. Welcome back to you both.
Glad to have you, Michael.
Well, we're very pleased to receive inquiries, questions, and comments from viewers and correspondents like you. And we've taken a number of them and clustered the topics up together. And today we're going to be discussing Yahweh's laws of dietary observance. Yahweh does have a lot to say about what we eat. And at this late stage of the Bible story, we find ourselves wondering how to apply those laws in this modern age and modern culture, in terms also of what kind of foods are available. We have 4 questions we hope to cover today, brothers, and I'm going to be starting with you, Brother Alan. We have a correspondent named Jerome, and he writes as follows. Is Yahweh saying in Genesis 1, verse 30, that man can eat meat for food, or was he just referring to every green plant?
I think the inquirer is getting confused perhaps by the King James English, where it says, to every beast of the earth and to every fowl of the air and to everything that creeps upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. Well, back in the day, meat meant food in the Old English, where today, of course, we just consider that as animal origins. So Yahweh was really saying that from the Hebrew, we understand that the word meat is oklah, and it means basically a general term for food. Yahweh is giving all green plants for food to all animals. And this is, I believe, is the issue here, and where the confusion comes in. We have to remember that there was no death until Adam sinned. Mm-hmm. So that all the animals were eating, and it seems rather strange to us, but you've got lions and tigers and bears eating crops, eating herbs, eating fruits, and not each other or other animals. But after sin came in, then the nature of animals actually changed, and so now we have a chain of food chain where one animal eats another. The animal's nature is even different. But we find that in the scriptures, we're going to go back in the millennial kingdom to that same situation that we find in Eden, where Isaiah 11:6 says that the wolf will lie down with the lamb. So forth. And we can't even imagine that. You know, why doesn't he eat that lamb? But
and a child shall lead them. Is that the one that
right.
says?
Uh-huh.
So then we're on friendly terms with all the animals too.
Exactly. And we don't have that danger.
Well, then this thing about meat, it looks like another one of those situations where the King James English uses a word that today has a slightly different meaning.
Exactly.
Well, it's important to also understand, when did we begin, or when did man begin to eat meat? You know, when did we depart from this vegetarian lifestyle that Adam and Eve obviously was part of? There's really 2 different opinions on this. Some say immediately after the fall, others say after the flood. I'm inclined to believe that it was sometime after the fall of Adam and Eve, after sin entered into the world. Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 through 3, or actually just verse 2, says, "You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, and a male and his female, to each of animals that are unclean, a male and a female. So it's important here to realize that we find two criteria, clean and unclean. So prior to the flood, we find that Yahweh categorizes animals as clean or unclean, which I believe shows that the dietary food laws were established prior to the flood, which indicates that they did at that point eat meat. But we know for sure after the flood, because we find in Genesis chapter 9, verses 3 and 4, it says, "Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I've given you all things, even as the green herbs," which we saw in Genesis chapter 1. But it says, "But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood." So we find here the ability to eat meat, something we did not find prior to the fall. So we do find that it was a progression. And I do believe it was because of sin. Sin entered in a corrupted creation. And I think you brought out a great point, referring to Isaiah chapter 11, where we find that the nature of animals will return back to the original creation, in the millennium, when
brothers,
Yahshua rules.
Yeah. In terms of equipping our audience to properly read the scriptures and understand them, it seems we should put them on alert that this word meat, everywhere it appears in the King James Bible, should be verified for its original meaning in the Hebrew and Greek. Because if we have a Bible full of places where it talks about meat, and it just means food in general, then I could see some important doctrinal tangents coming off of that if people aren't careful. I'm thinking now of a passage where Yahshua says that the natural digestive system purges all meats. That, what he's talking about is food.
Exactly.
So it's just whatever you eat.
Exactly. It's interesting, too, the point that Randy brought up, that the nature, I don't think people realize the impact sin has, not only on our lives, but also on nature itself. Yahweh says because of what Adam has done, he's going to curse even the ground. So now we're going to have thorns coming up, thistles coming up, weeds you got to contend with. Adam had to now work for his food, where before he just walk out and pick it off a tree.
Well, not only that, in verse 14 of chapter 3 of Genesis, it says, "And Yahweh Elohim said unto the serpent, Because you have done this, cursed are you above all cattle, and above every beast of the field, and you shall, and your belly shall you go." So it's almost as if, again, the animals themselves were cursed to some extent. But I was going to give an example, too, with what Brother Michael was speaking about with the Old English, if you will. In verse 28 of Genesis 1, it says, "And Elohim blessed them, and Elohim said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." Now, most people believe that's replenishing from some other time, that the earth was already replenished or filled previously. But the Hebrew, and even the Old English, that simply means to fill. That Yahweh said to fill the earth. It's another instance of an Old English word conveying something different
Well,
today.
I tell you, I love that King James language. We have excellent study tools that are derived from the structure of the King James. But it looks like these kind of phenomena, these word-based phenomena, they're a call for us to be more diligent and to double-check things.
Well, I think that's one reason why, as believers, we need to go back to the original language. It's so important that we go back to the Hebrew, we go back to the Greek, with the New Testament. We get back to the original, or as close to the original as we can achieve in the New Testament to discover and understand these words.
Well, we've been in this movement for like decades. And one of the primary themes amongst the fellowship is go back to the original languages as close as you possibly can. Get those fundamental meanings in place, and then things start to line up. Well, you brothers know that I take a lot of supplements, and I'm very careful about what supplements I select. So this next question kind of speaks to my heart. Randy, we have a correspondent named Sharon who writes the following. She says, "I am taking a supplement that has chondroitin in it. The company says it could have bovine or shark cartilage in it. I was wondering if the shark cartilage is still considered an unclean food, since it is not the meat we are eating or consuming in this supplement."
We get this question quite a bit, and I think we need to understand the commands. I'm going to read that. Leviticus chapter 11, we also know that Deuteronomy chapter 14 lists the commands for the dietary food laws. Verse 9 says, "These you may eat, of all that are in the waters, whatever in the waters has fins and scales, whatever in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. But all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, or anything which is in the water, they are an abomination to you." And that's a strong word. It's an abomination. "They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcass as an abomination." That's really what we're asking here, is whether this substance is included within their carcass, whether this substance is part of the carcass. So the word carcass, and this is from the Brown Driver and Briggs Hebrew Lexicon, is from the Hebrew word nebulah, and it means carcass, corpse of humans, idols, or animals. So it encompasses the entire animal based on the Hebrew. So based on that definition, I believe, and we believe here, that to take such a supplement would be wrong, would be a transgression against the command.
Right, and carcass basically means the body, the entire body. Remember when Yahweh told Israel, he said, "If you don't obey me, your carcasses will die in the wilderness." He uses that term. Now he's not saying just your bones, he's saying your whole self is going to perish. So when it says carcass, it means the body itself, and if that's unclean, then any part of that body would be unclean.
Well, just speaking for myself, on behalf of Sharon, I'm extremely careful about the capsules I use, the supplements I buy. In fact, when I go to the health food stores, I kind of drive them crazy. I say, listen, I'm on a diet very similar to a kosher diet. It's very similar to kosher as Jews define it, And I said, if I can't have a vegetarian capsule, then I have to know that the capsule is made of a bovine source or a vegetable source, something like that. It is possible to solve these problems using heavenly ordained methods, and I would urge our viewers to follow Yahweh's laws and find His blessings in the context of His commands. I know I have been able to do it, and I've been very blessed by it.
One more thing we may want to mention as well, and correlates or corresponds to this discussion, is capsules, which you mentioned. But many of the vitamins we take, vitamin E, I believe, is one. That's typically a gel cap. Normally, unless specified, that is typically made or partially made from swine or pig.
Right.
So we need to be cognizant of this and dig a little bit deeper. Contact the company if need be. We know that there's always an alternative, as you mentioned, Brother Mike.
Absolutely. I know they're out there, and I take a lot of pleasure in doing it Yahweh's way. Okay, we're going to ask you to stay tuned now for a medley of announcements we have prepared for you. We'll return shortly with my guests to pursue more questions having to do with Yahweh's dietary laws.
Why are there so many different Protestant churches today? All claim to teach the same Bible, yet are unable to reconcile their doctrines and understanding with other churches. More than 90 English translations of the Bible are in print, each with a goal to present the Scriptures better and more accurately than any other. So why are many traditional doctrines and practices difficult to prove from the Scriptures? You may be surprised to learn that many of these teachings come not from the Bible, but from man-made tradition and error formulated through centuries of pagan influence. Holidays that many churches promote, like Christmas and Easter, have roots in ancient mystery worship that followers of the Word should have no part of. If you are serious about what you believe, and if you are concerned about your eternal salvation, then it's time to open the Word. It's time to learn the facts from the Scriptures alone. To help you, we have produced a free booklet entitled The Most Misunderstood Book of All Time. This important booklet can be requested by calling 573-896-9248 or by writing P.O. Box 463, Holtz Summit, Missouri 65043. You can read and request this booklet online at www.yrm.org. Now, back to today's program.
Welcome back to Discover the Truth. I'm Michael Bannock, your host for this special question and answer edition. I'd like to introduce once again my friends Alan Mansager and Randy Folliard, both of Yahweh's Restoration Ministry. We're continuing now on the theme of Yahweh's dietary laws, how they might apply to us today. I want to first urge you to write into us with your questions, comments, and inquiries at discoverthetruth.tv. That's questions at discoverthetruth.tv. You can also visit us at our webpage, www.yrm.org. It's www.yrm.org. We'd love to hear from you. It is our pleasure to share with you what we learn from the Scriptures. As a matter of fact, sometimes in pursuing these questions, brothers, I find that we learn a few things along the way on our own, don't we?
It's true.
Hallelujah.
It's true.
So please do. It's our pleasure to share what we have with you. Now, I'm going to turn this next question over to Alan. We have a special correspondent named Tammy, and she writes the following to us, Alan. I know we are not supposed to eat beef and dairy together, but what about chicken and dairy? Also, what about dipping chicken in egg and breadcrumbs before baking? Chicken and egg together feels like it should be wrong.
The Jews have a Kabbalistic, the Kabbalah is a mystic set of mystic writings. They believe that meat symbolizes death, milk symbolizes life. You mix the two and you got a clash in the spiritual realm. So you're not supposed to do that.
According to them.
According to the Kabbalah, right.
Okay.
Well, the rabbis have taken one or several of the scriptural passages, like Deuteronomy 14:21, that says, you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. And from that I've extrapolated that we can't have meat and milk together when we cook, even when we wash. If one of us been in contact, dishes and plates and whatever, you can't put them all in the same dishwasher together. So they've gone beyond not just eating, but also any kind of contact. Deuteronomy 14:21, if you look at that word in could also mean on in the Hebrew. So you are not to take a goat, basically, that is nursing, he's on his mother's milk, and take it away from the mother and kill it and eat it. It is not a decent thing to do, apparently, in Yahweh's eyes. Even beyond that, the Orthodox Jews will wait 6 hours before eating milk, drinking milk or eating meat after they've had one or the other, figuring that by that then they're cleansed. But you see, there's nothing in Scripture that justifies any of this, if you really understand what's going on here.
So often with these laws, too, they're ambiguous. We don't know the original intent,
Right.
the original design. I was doing some study on this passage, and according to several commentaries, historically, this may go back to a pagan practice with the Canaanites. The Adams-Clark commentary, for instance, in reference to Exodus 23:19, where it talks about seething a kid in his mother's milk, says, quote, this passage has greatly perplexed commentators, but Dr. Cudworth is supposed to have given it true meaning by quoting a manuscript comment of a Karaite Jew, which he met with on this passage, quote, it was a custom of the ancient pagans, when they had gathered in all the fruits, to take a kid and boil it in the milk of its dam, and then in a magical way to go about and sprinkle with it all their trees and fields, gardens and orchards, thinking that by these to make them fruitful, and they might bring them more abundantly in the following year. Now this commentary goes on to say, I give this comment as I find it and add that Spencer has shown that the Zabi'i used this kind of magical milk to sprinkle their trees and fields in order to make them fruitful. Others understand it, as you've already explained, of eating flesh and milk together, others of a lamb or kid while it is sucking its mother, as you explained, and that the paschal lamb is here intended, which was not lawful to offer while sucking. I would like to read just one other reference here. This is from the Wycliffe Bible Commentary. It says that seething a kid, the direction seems oddly at variance with the other regulations and long caused much speculation by the commentators. Then in the Orgeret literature discovered in 1930, it was learned that boiling a kid in its mother's milk was a Canaanite practice used in connection with fertility rites. And that this person quotes Birth of the Gods, but it goes on to say Israel, by the presentation of the first fruits, acknowledged that blessing came from Yahweh, not from magic. So, whether it was taking a young kid before it was weaned, or abstaining from a pagan Canaanite practice, we're told not to do it. But I think we can certainly agree that today's rendering by Orthodox Judaism is certainly incorrect.
This is amazing, though. This question has become so multifaceted. I look at most of the dietary laws, and they look to me like either laws having to do with health, that I've done them for my own good, or they're laws of holiness. In other words, you're a holy temple, be careful what you put in there. But this particular commandment, don't boil a kid in his mother's milk, it looks to me, now I don't want to hijack the visit here, but it looks to me like Yahweh saying, don't do that because it looks pagan. This is what pagans do. I don't want you doing
Well, that is often the root of many of his commands. I think we've lost that because we don't understand the basis for it. But you look into it, rights having to do with blood. Why does he say don't eat the blood? Well, for one thing, there's life in that blood, but also the pagans made a big issue. That was a big part of their worship, is using blood in their ceremony.
Well, we've had a question, it's been some time, but should we pluck the middle of our eyebrows? And Scripture says don't do that. Mm-hmm. Or you read it, it says for the dead. So we find again it was a pagan practice. Mm-hmm.
It's significant that this comes up at this time of the year. Brothers, we're recording here at toward the end of the year 2009 at our studio here, and the rest of the world is celebrating Christmas. And our fundamental complaint about Christmas has been, hey, this looks so much like European pagan practices. This has got to be foreign to the spirit of truth.
It's true. Yeah. Well, going back to this issue here, we know, and here's the clincher for me. Do you remember when Abraham entertained a couple of angels in Genesis 18? Verse 8, it says he took butter and milk and the calf, which he had dressed, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. So my question then is, if it's okay for an angel to consume milk and meat together, what's the problem for me?
Well, I think Abraham joined them too, to tell you the truth.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did.
So that has to settle it for me, anyway. We have more here. Hopefully we can cover all of this before the bell rings for the broadcast. Randy, I'm going to be turning to you. We have a correspondent who is simply anonymous. He renders a two-part question to us. The first one, he says, recently I have read your online study on kosher, how to answer the most popular arguments against clean foods. Now that's a booklet you can find on our webpage. He says, in my opinion, most of the important New Testament passages not treated in it. That is 1 Corinthians 10, 25, 28. I have some nagging questions about it. First, what should one make of this verse? Quote, whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. It is often said that it is about meat dedicated to idols. That may be so, but the question remains how one can expect a Gentile meat market to have meat that was slaughtered according to the guidelines of the Torah.
Well, I think this person is right in the regard that we should have included this within our booklet. It is common. We get several inquiries on this. And as this person also stated, it's important to recognize that this passage is speaking about food sacrificed to idols. For instance, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 28 says, but if anyone says to you this was offered to idols, and do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you, and for conscience sake, for the earth is Yahweh's in all its fullness. So again, it's important to realize what the topic is here. It's not how the food was slaughtered. It is whether it is clean or whether it was sacrificed to idols. And we know that Paul, in verse 19 of this passage, said that idols were nothing. They were literally nothing. The only thing Paul was concerned with and was offending someone who may not have understood this truth, that they perceived that this idol had some sort of power or influence. So Paul said don't do it based on their own conscience. But what we find here is a passage about food sacrificed to idols. There is really nothing in the Torah that I know of that prescribes how to kill or slaughter an animal. I believe most of this is rabbinical, most of this is traditional, and again, absent from the Torah.
Well, there's the issue of spilling the blood, though. You want the blood spilled out.
Correct.
I think, okay. I've talked to people, I've listened to people who've worked in these slaughterhouses, and there are oceans of blood in these places. There's lots of blood being poured out there. And I thought that modern butchering practices put out enough blood to be consistent with that requirement.
And I believe there's other ways too to remove the blood, but you're absolutely right. We should. Torah says to remove the blood, and that's certainly something we should do. But again, the key point here in this passage is food sacrificed to idols, and to remove that is to ignore the context.
Let's see if we can quickly answer the second part. The anonymous inquirer also says he's got a concern about if any of them that believe not bid you to go for a feast, be you disposed to go, whatever is set before you, asking no question for conscience sake, eat it. So is this talking about clean and unclean foods?
No, again, it's referring to food sacrificed to idols. But maybe Alan would have a few words to this.
Again, yes, it's the same theme continues on in the second question. If this meat were not kosher, certainly Paul wouldn't be advocating, a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, even after Yahshua's death and resurrection, we know they were still eating clean. Peter, 10 years after his resurrection in Acts 10, said, I've never eaten anything common or unclean.
You know, I think that's a fundamental point here. We have to wind up pretty soon here. But in a lot of these cases, the reader should know better. The believer should know better. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay, we're going to wrap up for today. We ask you please to tune in again next time as we continue with more broadcasts on discovering the truth. Thank you very much for joining us.
For the free literature offered on today's program, write to Yahweh's Restoration Ministry, care of Discover the Truth, P.O. Box 463, Holt Summit, Missouri 65043. You can phone in your request to area code 573-896-9248. Don't forget to ask the operator about obtaining a free MP3 CD, which contains numerous sermons on many different topics. You can also visit our website at www.yrm.org for extensive study articles and online offers for free literature, CDs, and DVDs. We thank you for watching today. Join us again next week and discover the truth at this same time and station.